Okay, so last class we looked at inductive arguments, and we looked at two different ways you could go. You could go from the general to the specific, where you knew something about the group, like for instance FSU students. Example of that. We know that the male to female ratio here at FSU is actually quite skewed. The college or the university is, as far as students goes, 66% women. So if we look at any given class, and we did that in this class, we found that this class actually fit the norm pretty well. Although I think some of the guys were absent that day, so it might not fit it quite so well right now. The other way that you can go, that we're going to look at more today, and we talked about a little bit at the start, was going from the specific to the general, which means that if you're looking at a group, right? With any given group, unless it's something that you already have really good data on, you haven't observed the entire group. As a matter of fact, with most things in the world, it's like this, isn't it? So think, for example, about those geese that you see on campus. Right? You guys have seen those coupled geese, and you don't want to get too close to them because they'll bite you if you do. Geese are pretty mean. Don't bring kids near them because the geese will go after the kids too. Well, there's probably 3 or 4 couples of geese on campus. And you've seen other geese in your time, right? Now, think about how small that portion is of geese in the world. I mean, nobody's ever seen all the geese in the world, right? Not even any other goose, because they're in different flights. But what can we do? We look at a portion of them, and then we can generalize, and this is what animal behavioralists do, isn't it? They generalize about what the other ones will act like. And with animals, this is not too hard to do, in part because one goose tends to be pretty much like another goose. They operate largely on instinct, and if one goose has a bill, another goose has a bill, there's certain what we call morphological characteristics. So you don't have to look at a million geese in order to know about how many geese do you think are in the world? Probably at least hundreds of millions, bless you, if not billions. Same thing with say the human form, right? Physically, you don't have to look at a million humans to know that humans generally have 2 eyes and 1 nose and 2 ears, and that the ears tend to be on the side of the head and the eyes tend to be in the front of the head. Not all animals are like that too, by the way. Think about fish, right? Fish don't have ears that you can see, and where are their eyes? Well, they're on the side of their head usually. Some might be a little bit closer to the front, but they don't have sort of predator stereoscopic vision that we do, right? Animals that have their eyes in the front of the head, this is where we could do some inductive enumeration. Think about animals that actually do have their eyes in the front of the head. What are they? Well, name some. There's us, right? What else?
Dogs.
Dogs do, yeah. What else?
Tigers.
What's that? Tigers, yeah. Pretty much all cats do, don't they? What else? Actually, those are 2 huge families, the canine and the feline family. There are a lot of other things that are connected with them, like the bears and the wolverines and all those sort of things. Anything else you can think of? Any other animals that have their eyes in the front of their head?
Monkeys.
What's that?
Monkeys.
Monkeys, yeah. Actually, all the monkeys and apes do. What else? Think about non-mammals. Snakes. Yeah, I guess snakes actually do have. They're kind of, compared to like say geckos or lizards, a lot of lizards, yeah. Actually some lizards do have their eyes kind of forward. What about birds? What birds have their eyes in the front of their head? Yeah. Birds of, what do we call those? Prey. Birds of prey. So now, do you notice a pattern here? With all these kind of animals? What do all these animals eat? Meat, yeah. And now you haven't actually observed all animals, but you you know, let's say you go to the zoo, right? And you're looking around there, you look at the tiger cage, you look at the monkey cage, you look at dogs, you know, there's a cat wandering around, you look at that, you go to the eagle, whatever they call it, Airy, and you notice, you know, all of these animals that have eyes in the front of their head, and you start reading the placards because you're not sure what they eat, or you talk with the zookeeper, they all eat meat. You could actually start making an inference, couldn't you? What would your inference be?
If your eyes in front of your head, you eat meat.
What's that?
If your eyes in front of your head, you eat meat.
Yeah, and it's inductive because you don't know that for absolute certain. I mean, there could be some, well, think about a vegetarian, right? They're vegetarian human beings. And now think about animals that don't have their eyes on the side of their head. Think about horses. What's that?
I said horses.
Horses are a good example. What else? What other animals don't have their eyes on the side of their head? Cows, right? And bovines in general. You know, water buffaloes don't either. What else?
Dolphin, wild.
I don't know if dolphins do or not. Dolphins are definitely predatory, you know. Actually, dolphins, we talked about this a little bit before. Scientists have actually found out that dolphins are sometimes sadistic and hurt other species just for fun. Isn't that terrible? They're cute, but mean. Well, yeah, you get the idea, right? You can look at a lot of other animals and say, well, you know, if your eyes are on the sides of your head, you're probably a prey animal. Why are your eyes on the side of your head? So you almost have eyes, you know, heard that expression, eyes in the back of your head? Can't actually have that. But if your eyes are over here, you can see a much wider range of vision, and you can see those predators coming. Why are ours in front? Because we, like cats, dogs, wolverines, we have to hunt other animals, and it helps to be able to have some depth perception, doesn't it? Plus, we have to, you know, kill each other. We are one of the species with the highest rate of what they call intraspecies predation, which means that we prey on each other. Not in our civilized circumstances, right? But taken away, and sometimes we do. Lions do too. The majority of lions, apparently, that die, the majority of those deaths are at the hands of other lions. That's an awful lot to get from eyes in the front of your head or in the side of your head, isn't it? But the general idea is, if you have a group, if you have some sort of population, some sort of what we call a target population, and you are able to observe what we call a sample, and that sample meets certain characteristics, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, then you can generalize about some what we call a relevant property. Sometimes they call this a quality. The idea is it's some sort of characteristic that the things in that group have, and you're saying that there's a good chance that the target group also has this. This is what we call enumerative induction. And you've been doing this your entire life, haven't you? When you figured out things about human nature, who to trust, who not to trust, did you actually know all of the other human beings in the world? No, but you made generalizations about them, didn't you? When you figured out as a little baby, one of the first things you started to do after you cried and got changed and, you know, bonded with your mom and maybe your dad and, you know, whoever else, one of the first things you started doing once you had some motor control is putting everything you could in your mouth. And some things that worked out really good for, and some things that worked out really bad for, didn't it? You don't remember it, but those of you that have seen babies, you know, you've seen them put things in their mouth and they make a face and then they throw it away, and then other things they like, right? What that baby is actually doing is acquiring knowledge about things in the world. And that's working in large part by inductive enumeration. They're putting together a bunch of cases, and they're saying they can generalize from this sample to other things. I'll give you kind of a funny example. Maybe some of you can relate to this. When I was a kid, I had one of those dads who, he worked really hard during the week, and then on the weekend, that was his time, and he was going to take it easy and lay around in the lawn chair, maybe watch football, or sit out on the deck or something like that. And one of the jobs of the kids was to do what? To bring him a beer, right? And I learned a few things actually about that. I mean, one of the things I learned is don't shake up the beer, because what happens then? Yeah, it shoots up in his face. And you could, you don't have to do this an awful lot, but most kids will do it more than once. And they're building knowledge about the world, and actually knowledge if their dads are scientifically inclined about carbonation. Maybe knowledge if their dads are angry dad about what happens when you shake up dad's beer, right? But I would take a sip sometimes, because I noticed he really liked it. Yeah, I noticed you making a face. What does beer taste like? Especially to a kid. It tastes like crap. It's very bitter. That's why it doesn't taste good.
What tastes bitter?
Kids like sweet things. Actually, your taste buds, what scientists tell us is your taste buds are not fully developed when you're a child. They're much more geared towards the sweet, and they don't really like the bitter, the salty, that sort of thing. As you get older, that changes, especially for men, towards liking bitter and salty things. Now, you take, several sips, and then you generalize beer tastes bad. What are you generalizing about? You're not just generalizing about that single beer or that beer in the refrigerator. You are generalizing about all beer, aren't you? And then when you get older, and you go to college and you're at a party and, somebody hands you a beer and you take a sip and you say, well, this isn't that bad. Actually, your taste buds have changed. And you say, yeah, I kind of like this, And then when you discover the whole world of beers and you realize that American beers are all pretty much, one kind, except for microbrews, and then you realize there's all these other kinds, then you widen your realm of experience, don't you? And you figure out, if you're a person who likes that, or you could think about other things that you like to eat or drink. You develop, eventually, through this sampling, you develop knowledge about a given realm of products. If you realize that you like whiskey, I don't like whiskey myself. I've tried to learn to like it, and a lot of my relatives really like it, and they're kind of connoisseurs. I never picked up a taste for it. But those who are connoisseurs, they know which brands they like. How do they know that? Well, they tried that brand. And they keep on trying it, so presumably the brand is going to taste more or less the same. Right? You know this with foods that you like. How many pizzas do you think you've eaten in your lifetime? Just take a guess. I mean, I wouldn't even know where to start. I know I've eaten at least 1,000. It's got to be more than that, though. I won't let that.
Talking about individual pizzas, or
yes, individual pizzas, not slices.
Different kinds.
Individual pizzas. Each individual instance. See, that's a good question, because what are we measuring here? Each individual portion of the sample is what we're looking at. And then we're generalizing about the larger class. And notice it's always inductive, because you could eat 1,000 pizzas from, say, Domino's, right? And Domino's tastes good, and then you get that one day where the new guy was making the pizza and he totally screwed it up, and the driver was late, so it's cold by the time that it gets to you, and it doesn't taste good. An inductive generalization could have exceptions. It's not saying that it's 100% guaranteed. But the more that you sample, the more you should be able to generalize, the more accurately you should be able to say, yes, this is going to be good, this is going to be bad. You can do this about other things as well. Think about opinion polls. We just had an election a little while ago, right? 2010. And what were they running all over the place before that? Who are people going to vote for? Now, how do they make those predictions? Think about those, not the ads, but you know, the print ones that you see. What sort of information is conveyed in there? What do they tell you?
Parties.
Okay, they're indexed by parties. And now, what information do they actually give you about it?
Their stances and.
Well, not if they're doing polls. The percentage of people who, if they're doing projecting polls, they're saying the percentage of people who say they're going to vote for a particular party, they're future-oriented. So if they do it in North Carolina and they find that 55% of the people say they're going to vote Democrat, 40% of the people say they're going to vote Republican, 5% just don't know one way or the other. That's some information, isn't it? And that's information about that large target population. Now, here's another thing to think about. Have they actually observed this whole target population? No, a large portion of it they have not observed in any way. They haven't polled them. So what did they do? What's some other information that you see in those blurbs in papers and in magazines on the internet? Yeah, sometimes they do. That can be interesting information. But in order for you to tell whether it's a good poll or not, there's some information that they have to provide you.
How many were there?
Exactly. How many people did they actually ask? If they say, we only asked 5 people walking down the street, what their political opinions were, who they were going to vote for, that's not a very good poll at all. You can't have any pretense of being scientific with that. You can find 5 people to say just about anything, can't you? If you look hard enough. Now, if they poll 1,000 people, that's not bad. That's probably still not enough to be really conclusive. You notice they talk about a margin of error, 5% margin of error with 1,000 people. What they're doing is they're observing some small group, and then they're going to generalize from that. So, would it be better if they polled 10,000 people? That's probably going to be a lot more accurate in that case, isn't it? And we'll come back to this example in a few minutes. Let's think about some other examples just to get this idea in our mind. Think about products now. How do they know that there aren't rats in your cans of tomatoes? Or that, when you open up a package of underwear every once in a while, you see that little sticker that says inspected by number so-and-so? How do they actually know that the products are any good? Do they actually look at every single one of them as they come off the line? They do random samples, exactly. With grocery goods, often what they'll do is they'll be in a big warehouse and they'll say, all right, that box, that box, that box. And they're doing it fairly randomly. They'll take those boxes out, they'll open them up, they'll open up each can, and they'll see whether there's anything that's not supposed to be in there. And if there is, then, red flag goes up, and then they start looking a little bit more carefully. But if there isn't, then what do they conclude? They conclude that about the entire target, don't they? Yeah. And it may not be the case, The amount that we actually do sample when it comes to products is pretty low. We do this with security things as well, do security checks catch everything? Not everything. I mean, I worked in a maximum security prison, and we had some pretty good security procedures in place. You'd go through the front gate, and you went through an X-ray machine. You had to take everything out of your pockets. You got patted down. Sometimes they would have sniffers there, chemical sniffers to see if you had any drug residue on you. And every once in a while, randomly, they would pull people out of the line and they would get a more extensive search. Not quite a strip search in the case of us professors, but pretty close. And they did this for the guards too. All the guards would have to go through the front gate as well. There was still trafficking though. It didn't actually block all of it. And guaranteed, some of that actually got through the front gate. Those security procedures weren't perfect. Now think about when we say, yeah, you know, our shipping is pretty secure. You know those huge shipping containers that you see? How many of them do you think they search? What proportion? We're supposed to search them, right? We're supposed to at least say that they're safe. They don't have any, you know, nuclear material in them, or, you know, 50, you know, Chinese people being brought over here and sold as slaves, which happens.
They probably check less than 5%.
You're right. They do check less than 5%. They check less than 2%, as far as the stats that I've seen. That's probably not enough to tell. Now this brings up an important point. How can you tell whether your sample is good enough? There's really two things that go into this. I know that your book talks about 3 criteria, but they really boil down to 2 main criteria. If you look on page, there we go. Look on page 351, it talks about size, diversity, and bias. Now, size is key. The amount that you're actually looking at is really important. And the diversity and the bias, we could put those under one main rubric of whether it is representative. How big does a sample have to be in order to be a good sample? That really varies, doesn't it? Again, let's think about geese. How many geese do you think you need to go around and take a look at or dissect or observe before you know quite a lot about geese? Probably not that many, right? I mean, it will get better over time, and you know, you'll see some strange anomalies every once in a while. Because animals are not, you know, just machines. But animals like geese are pretty straightforward. You've seen, you know, one goose, you've seen most of them. In your high school biology class, do they make you guys dissect animals? No? Some places, they now have this computer thing. They do the computer dissection instead. How many do they have you dissect? 3?
Same animal or a different one?
Well, let's pick a same animal. Did you guys dissect pigs?
No, we did frogs.
We did pigs. Frogs? Okay, we did frogs, pigs, and I think worms. And the worm, there really isn't much to a
But
worm.
it's like 4 people to a group.
Okay, yeah, I guess we were better supplied. We had 2 people to a group. It was really gross. I had a strong sense of smell, so formaldehyde really got to me. But, now, why do I bring this up? Think about this. If animal morphology was really fundamentally different from one pig to the next, they would have you do a bunch of them if they're going to teach you about it. But they don't need to, because, you know, one pig's liver is more or less like another pig's liver. You know, the bones tend to be in the same place. Those are physical characteristics. Your sample doesn't have to be very big in that case. Now think, for example, about psychological characteristics. Think about human beings. Think about voting behavior and political preferences. You can't just look at 5 people if you want to talk about a whole state. You know, even 100 people isn't very much, is it? You want it to be a larger sample. And why? Because human beings, when it comes to psychological things, are all over the map. You know, another textbook actually had a great example. They said, if you want to know something about the distribution of human beings of one race or another in a given area, you don't have to have that big of a sample. But let's say you want to know something about the sexual practices and preferences of Hispanics between ages 18 and 35. Right? That's pretty specific. Why do you need a large sample? Because when it comes to sexual preferences and behavior, human beings are all over the map, aren't they? And so if you pick too small of a sample, you're probably not going to get a very good snapshot of where things are you? Think about all the crazy things that people are into, especially now that the internet's here, and you know, everybody who's who's got, some weird fetish can find support groups for it, right? Back when I was a kid, if you were into something really out there, you kept it to yourself, right? Because otherwise people would think you were a freak. Nowadays, I mean, you can just type in anything you like on Google, and the weirdest things in the world will pop up, right? And if you look at these, what you'll find is somebody will say, I'm into this, and I'm not going to try to come up with any examples because I'm filming this. Somebody will be into something really strange, and then there'll be somebody else saying, I'm into the same thing too. You're not weird. You're perfectly normal. It's the rest of the world that's all, against it. Now, what that shows us is that when it comes to things like this, sexual behavior, think about buying habits, the things that people will buy, the crazy stuff, unpredictable. We have every product in the world you could possibly think of, just about. At least not in Fayetteville. You can go to New York and get it. That's only 12 hours away. And they've got just about anything you can possibly imagine. There's probably people working on things right now, putting together new combinations as we speak. So if you're going to try to predict something like that, you want to have a fairly good sample size. I'll give you another example. Here at FSU, why do we do these assessments, like the CLA, to measure critical thinking abilities? Well, we want to see where our students are. We want to see if there's improvement. We want to see what the student body looks like. Can we do that if we don't have a large enough sample? We can't get good data if we don't have a large enough sample. Because what might happen? Well, these things are actually connected. Let's say we do the Rising Junior CLA and we don't make it mandatory. We make it voluntary. Who's going to show up and take it? Who will show up and take it? That's what I'm asking. Not who won't. Who will show up and take it? What kind of students? The dedicated students, right? Now, is that going to be that'll make us look good, won't it? Because the scores will be higher. But is that going to give us useful information about where our students really are and where we need to improve? Probably not. We actually want to get everybody that we can. Student evaluations, big problem with those. Those are also doing random sampling too, aren't they? Big problem with those. Once we went online with them, why are they a problem? You guys have done them.
You put holes on your account.
They put holds on your account. What sort of mood does that put you in?
Ticks you off.
Ticks you off. That has to do with the representativeness of the sample. If you're already in a bad mood, you're probably going to score the teacher lower, aren't you?
No.
No?
I know.
Well, you're conscientious, What else happens? I know some students have 7 classes and they get a hold put on their account and they need to fill out 7 evaluations, and each one of them has about 50 questions, doesn't it? What do students start doing?
Just the same thing.
Yeah, either they click all 5s or they click all 1s. Again, what that does is that really skews the sample. We're not getting a good representative sample because of the way we set things up. The other problem is we got better size, didn't we? Because we included everybody. But you know who we're including? Students who dropped the class. Should we be including them in the sample? Are they reliable judges of anything pertaining to the class?
Depends on how long they stay here.
Maybe, but when's the drop date? It's like midway through the semester, right? Maybe 10 weeks? So even there, they still don't have as much information as the other students.
If you got 10 weeks out of 16, they might say, for instance, they might have dropped it to save their GPA.
Yeah, there could be exceptions like that. But for the most part, what's going to be the case? Well, the students who drop, usually in that case? Actually, what I'm doing there is I'm giving you an enumerative induction based on my experience. Most of the students who come in with withdrawal slips haven't been showing up. And they'll say, yeah, Dr. Sadler, right? I know, I should have been showing up to class, and they get kind of bashful and all that. Would you mind signing this sheet? And I'll say, okay. See you next semester. What are other ways in which things might be unrepresentative? Well, you know, this notion of bias is important. Let's say we're doing political polling. Here's one that actually did come up. Not in the last election, but the election before it. When they do those phone surveys, who were they calling before? They've changed this a bit.
People in their own party.
Say again?
People in their own party.
That can be a problem sometimes, but that's not usually the case. Were they calling these?
Cell phone?
Yeah. Okay, now think about this. How many of you have a cell phone? Raise your hands if you do. Okay, now keep your hands up, those of you who have cell phones. And keep your hand up now if you have a landline in addition to a cell phone. That means you have a phone besides a cell phone at home. Okay, so only about 3/4 of you. And I'm guessing that's because most of you are in a dorm where you have a phone or not? Yeah. How many of you are going to have a landline when you get out? You're going to purchase an additional phone line when you're living on your own. One, two.
Sometimes, like, when cable people.
They bundle,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that's one reason to do it. That's the reason I have a landline, but I haven't actually used my landline for over 2 years.
Yeah.
Now, actually think about that. If they call my landline, I don't have the phone hooked up. I'm not going to be part of that sample, am I? So my views are not going to be represented. If they're only calling landlines and they're not calling cell phones, they're missing a good proportion of the voters. And who do you think they're missing more? Younger people or older people? Yeah.
Most of the older people have.
Yeah, older people generally don't have cell phones. That's introducing bias into the sample. It skews things towards one population and away from another. Another problem could be with what they're calling diversity. When you're doing a sample, you want to make sure that your sample actually adequately reflects the larger group. So if we were doing a sample about something that's not gender or race related directly, here at FSU, like let's say we wanted to know, let's pick something besides tuition because we've talked a lot about that. What's something that you guys are actually interested in and have some opinions about? Sports, okay. So the NFL players strike. Good thing or bad thing? Maybe the NFL players should quit screwing around and get back to work so we can be entertained, right? Let's say we do a poll. Now, if we were going to do a poll at FSU and we want to say we're being representative of FSU students, we would want that sample, the part that we do observe, to be representative of the whole. So then we would actually pay attention to things like gender. We would probably want that sample to include more women than men. If all we're doing is going around and we're asking the men, who are probably a little bit more interested in football than women, although these days, I think it's that sort of gender gap has really changed in the last couple of generations. A lot of women are interested in NFL football. If we were only to ask the men, we would have a non-representative sample. It would lack diversity. Now, it might occur to you, well, I better go around and ask the guys because they're probably the most interested ones. But you would be thereby actually setting yourself up to have a bad sample. Do you have a question? Okay. What else? We would have to sort things out by race, by age, all those sorts of things. We would want it to be representative. This classroom might work for some of those. It probably wouldn't work for others because it's much more skewed towards the young end, isn't it, for FSU students. We do have a lot of older students. We just don't have an awful lot of them in 8 o'clock classes on Monday mornings. So these are key things that you have to look at when somebody is making an inductive argument. In order for you to decide whether it's a strong argument or a weak argument, you want to ask yourself, is that sample large enough? And there's no absolute rule for that. You have to use your common sense. You have to think this through. What's going to work for physical things, where there's regular processes. the sample can be quite small. If it's psychological traits like voting behavior or religious preferences or sexual behavior and views about sexuality, there you're going to have to have a fairly large sample. And you also need that sample to be representative. And again, is there a hard and fast rule for determining this? You have to use your common sense. You have to think about this in order to determine whether a sample is really representative. Let me give you one good example. Let's say we're talking about weather. Right? Now the weather from day to day changes quite a bit, doesn't it? And actually it's very difficult to predict the weather. A lot of people get angry at weathermen because the weatherman will say, you know, it's going to rain today, and then it doesn't rain, and you've been carrying around the umbrella all day long. You know, start cursing out the weather person. But it's very difficult to predict it because there's a lot of factors involved. What about over the long run? Think about whether you can predict about average snowfall or lack of it, or the amount of precipitation, or whether you're going to get a lot of wind or stuff like that from year to year to year. I mean, how many of you are from Fayetteville, or from, at least from this area? A few of you, okay. So in your experience, we do get snow. How many days of snow on average would you say we get a year?
A year, 5.
You think that much?
Not
5?
every year either.
Maybe
Some
5
years
or
don't.
Yeah, so I'm asking average.
Some snow,
Yeah.
I'd say about 5 days out of the year.
You talking about flurries or accumulation?
Talking about snow.
No, snow.
I'm just saying snow. Okay, so let's say 5 days. So now let's say you guys have observed for the last 20 years that on average, 5 days of snow each year. Can you predict that next year, and then you're talking about something that you haven't observed yet, it's part of this target population. Can you predict that it's likely that there'll be 5 days of snow the next year? Yeah, you can, because weather patterns are relatively similar. It may be off, but again, we're dealing with inductive arguments, right? So we're dealing with what's likely. Over time, that may change. We've been observing changes in the weather patterns, but people make business decisions based on these. That's one way that you can tell whether people think there's a good inductive argument there or not, if somebody's willing to put their money there. Think about wind farms now. You know, the weather patterns change, and winds change too, don't they? But can you actually predict where it would be profitable to put gigantic windmills that cost millions of dollars to put in place to generate electricity? You guys have seen them, haven't you? These huge wind farms. I think they're actually looking at doing some and some solar stuff in North Carolina. That's all based on enumerative induction. Predicting the weather is based on the past, and it's a projection about the future to come. And if, you know, if it deals with profit, these people are thinking 20, 30 years down the line. They're making a big prediction. Why are they able to do that? Because if you look at enough weather reports from enough time, your sample has a significant enough size, and it's also representative enough.
You look like a weatherman.
Do I? It's going to be sunny. So these are all things to keep in mind. So these tell you what we're looking at for whether it's a strong or a weak inductive argument of this sort. Next class, we're looking at analogies, a new kind of inductive argument that you've used in your life, but you haven't probably taken a close look at before.
In our last week, light work week Friday, right?